Half a day. My name is Romina King. I'm an assistant professor of geography at the University of Guam Micronesia Area Research Center. My colleagues from the CNMI are Robbie Green from the Pacific Coastal Research and Planning Group and Aaron Darrington, the lead planner for the CNMI Office of Planning and Development. And I will be presenting climate change planning in the Marianas Islands. So the presentation format is as follows. First, I will introduce some key documents and reports that can assist with planning. Second, I will highlight some of the past and ongoing work for both islands. Third, I will share some of the potential next steps. And if there is time, I can field questions. So one of the go-to reports is fondly referred to as the PIRCA, or the Pacific Islands Regional Climate Assessment. It is a report aimed at assessing the state of knowledge about climate change, the impacts, and the adaptive capacity of the USAPI, including Guam and the CNMI. So PIRCA is a collaborative effort that engages federal, state, and local government agencies, non-governmental organizations, academia, businesses, and community groups. And the aim is to inform and prioritize some of the activities in the face of a changing climate. So Guam's report summarizes the key climate change issues that affect our island, which include threats to human health, risks to freshwater resources, increasing wildfire, and the potential for damage to infrastructure caused by future sea level rise and stronger typhoons. Climate change is expected to disrupt many aspects of life, and those who are already socially vulnerable will be harmed more than others by extreme weather and climate shifts. So one incredibly useful feature about this report is that it provides specific guidance for decision makers seeking to better understand how climate variability and climate change can impact Guam and its communities within their respective fields of expertise. So this assessment also identifies needs for additional information and research. And if we could fill those knowledge gaps, we could support responses that enhance resilience and help Guam withstand future changes. So in addition to Guam, the PIRCA also released a report specific to the CNMI with very similar findings. Hotter weather, stronger typhoons, coral reef death, and physical and mental health risks are among some of the challenges detailed in the CNMI PIRCA. Threatened resources include high-value coastal infrastructure and ocean ecosystem services. Climate change is expected to disrupt many aspects of life in the CNMI, like Guam. And similar to Guam, those who are already socially vulnerable, such as the elderly, low-income families, and individuals with disabilities, they are at greater risk from extreme weather and climate events. So again, this report, just like Guam, provides guidance for decision makers seeking to better understand the implications of climate change for the CNMI and its communities. And I'd like to highlight that both reports also address the threats to ecosystems and biodiversity, and how it's imperative to improve ecosystem and biodiversity, and how climate change will affect that. So yes. Okay, moving on. Sea level rise. So both reports state that sea level rise is an impact that Guam and CNMI should plan for. Of the many impacts, sea level rise is the most examined for Guam and the CNMI. Both islands have produced reports that look at the vulnerability of coastal areas to sea level rise. And for Guam, the mean sea level rise trend is approximately 3 feet by the end of the century. And this doesn't seem like much, but what does concern us is the wave run-up from future typhoons. And typhoons are expected to be less frequent but more intense, according to the PIRCA. And sea level rise is basically the base that everything else sits upon. So if you look at the graphic, you can see the mean sea level rise on the bottom, and your tide is on top of that, plus your wave setup, plus the storm surge, and all of that, and then your wave run up as well. And so all of that could increase coastal inundation by a lot during a big storm event. So Guam doesn't have a wave run-up model yet, but we did do a vulnerability assessment that looked at a variety of sea level rise scenarios provided by NOAA. We overlaid each of those scenarios, a 3-foot, a 5-foot, and a 10-foot, over our water network, our wastewater system, our power grid, our road and bridges network, and the government of Guam buildings. And the 10-foot sea level rise was used to show potential inundation of a 3-foot sea level rise plus a wave run up from a severe storm event. And this is what we shared with planners and developers about the worst case scenario to plan for. Not a 10-foot sea level rise, but a 3-foot sea level rise with a wave run up. We don't have a wave run up model yet, but we do have historical data from Chip Gard and Mark Lander about some of the inundation that past typhoons have caused. Okay, so Saipan also did a vulnerability assessment looking at sea level rise, and I'd like to note that they did it first before Guam, and this effort was led by Robbie Green. He too looked at sea level rise scenarios and utilized participatory GIS to assess exposure and sensitivity, as well as obtain community input. And his report is available online. If you just Google Climate Vulnerability Assessment CNMI 2014, it'll pop up. And Robbie Green is present, so if you have any questions about this, you can please feel free to ask him. Okay, so in addition to sea level rise, both islands also looked at social vulnerability. So social vulnerability refers to the potential negative effects on communities that's caused by external stresses on humans. Such stresses include natural or human-caused disasters or disease outbreaks. If you can reduce social vulnerability, you can decrease both human suffering and economic loss. So to calculate social vulnerability, we used an index created by the Center for Disease Control. This index is very mainland-centric, and Ed Leon Guerrero calculated it for our vulnerability assessment. However, Dr. Yvette Polino and Dr. Groznia Badowski from the University of Guam updated the SVI and also took it a step further and modified it to include factors that are specific to Guam. So taking into account variables such as concrete roofs, internet access. So this graphic shows the SVI for Guam by village and compares the results from the CDC methodology with the adjusted methodology. So essentially, the darker the purple, the more vulnerable the village. Saipan and CNMI also did an SVI, and this effort was led by Robbie Green. So you can see in his picture that areas in red are more vulnerable than the areas in green. Okay, now that I provided incredibly quick overviews of some key works for both islands, I'm going to talk about governance. So in Guam, Governor Leon Guerrero issued an executive order to establish a Climate Change Resilience Commission. And this commission is supposed to craft an adaptation strategy that addresses energy, water resources, ocean and land resources, infrastructure and community resilience, development planning, food security, public health and safety, greenhouse emissions, and carbon footprint. This commission is led by Evangeline Lujan from the Guam Water Authority, and I serve as the vice chair. So a popular framework to address climate change is the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17. Climate action is number 13. So for Guam, these SDGs were incorporated into the Guam Green Growth Framework, or G3. This is led by Dr. Austin Shelton at the Center for Island Sustainability and consists of a working group of every possible stakeholder imaginable to create plans to achieve each of these sustainable development goals. The Guam Climate Change Resilience Commission is an active participant. Our chair, Evangeline Lujan, is also a co chair of the Thriving Natural Resources Group of the G3 framework. So the CNMI has also applied the ethos of the Sustainable Development Goals into the Smart Safe Growth. So the Smart Safe Growth is applied to, say, project scoping. They created a really cool online SSG evaluation tool where developers and project managers can put in their projects to see whether they should be concerned about an impact like flooding and whether they adequately addressed it. CNMI is looking to expand this tool into the permit review process, which will require training for agencies and developers. And this last slide was courtesy of Erin Darrington, and I'm going to defer all questions to her and Robbie of the CNMI. Finally, recommendations. One, both islands need a wave run-up model. The sea level rise scenarios are not enough. I'm pleased to say that PICASC and Hawaii Sea Grant are actively supporting this work. Second, it's crucial to reduce exposure and vulnerability to the built environment. And we should prioritize humans and definitely really try to reduce poverty. If we reduce social vulnerability, we can reduce the risk to human health and safety. Finally, further research should be conducted on the viability of nature-based solutions as a potential adaptation to sea level rise and other impacts of climate change. A holistic approach is key to successful adaptation, which is why many countries have adopted the SDGs to not only improve human lives, but also the environment. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I can take them if we have time. And again, please, this is my email address along with Robbie Green and Erin Darrington, and I'd like to thank both of them for assisting me with this presentation.